So what I've got here is some 8-quarter walnut boards. I've spared you watching me mill these. Started out as a rough sawn 8-quarter boards that I cut into length on the miter saw, ran them over the jointer to get one face flat and also one of the edges square and flat, and from there I planed them down to the final thickness, and now I'm kind of arranging them to match them up and figure out what order I want these to go in. So these are going to make the base to this table that I'm making, and it's an elliptical shaped base. So what I'm basically doing is kind of making a barrel, although an elliptical shaped one, not a round barrel. So right now I'm just figuring out which order I want them to go in, matching grain, color, all that sort of thing. So I'm pretty happy with the order now that I have them arranged in, and think that looks pretty good. So before I do anything else, I'm going to go through and I'm going to number each board so that I can keep it in its right place. And I'm also going to mark an angle on each board so that I know which side I need to cut at which angle. I don't want to screw up and get it backward, run it through the table saw backwards and cut the angle on the wrong side. So it's also just going to help me keep my place. So to give you an idea of the design here and what I'm building, I'll show you the rough idea here in SketchUp. This is the basic model. I just used this to kind of get an idea of what size I wanted and everything else. But specifically with this table base, I took that ellipse and then made another copy of it and cut it into 12 segments. So I've got my 12 individual boards here, and using my SketchUp model I can calculate exactly what these angles need to be. And speaking of these angles, they really need to be dead on. I mean, down to the 1/10 of a degree. If you're even a little bit off on these, 0.2, 0.3 degrees off, by the time you glue all of this up, each time that error is getting compounded as you work your way around, and by the time you close up the quote-unquote barrel here, the two sides are not at all going to line up. So really important to get this really precise. Not only the angle, the exact angle, but also the exact width of each board had to be really precise too, down to the 32nd of an inch. So setting it to the next angle that I needed to cut here, and you'll see me here on this one just to reiterate how important it is to get this spot on. Not only the angle, but also the width here. I mean, I've got I don't know if you can tell, but I've got optimizers on here, really trying to zoom in and see down to that 32nd of an inch mark on my ruler here to get the width exactly perfect. Yeah, after going through this, I gotta say I have a newfound respect for barrel makers, especially the old school barrel makers back in the day before we had all these fancy tools. I know now barrels, largely made by machines and robots, but the old school way of doing it all by hand is just really impressive, that these guys were able to cut staves that not only had the perfect angles on each side, but also were tapered, and get all of that to line up and have it be so perfect that they were actually watertight. Very, very impressive. I do not have that level of skill, and if I'm being truthful, even using the digital angle finder and table saw and optimizers to measure the width of my cuts down to the 32nd of an inch and all of that, when I was gluing all this up, it still didn't come together perfectly. It took quite a bit of finessing, if you will, with the clamps. So all the angles are cut now, just sort of putting it together, making sure everything looks good and seems like it's going to fit, and so far so good here. The other thing that I would say here is I wasn't too concerned with it just being absolutely perfect, because I am going to power carve this whole base. So the best way that I could figure out though to get these boards to come together, I tried different methods, ratchet straps wrapped around the whole thing to bring it all together. That didn't work at all. So the best way I could figure out was using the domino, just to put in a few dominoes into each board and really just use that for alignment, and also to sort of serve as another pair of hands to hold them together while I was trying to figure out how to clamp these. It was a tricky glue up, tricky to get this to come together. Basically, the way that I had to do it was glue 2 boards up at a time. And then I would take those pairs and glue them up into 4 boards, and then the 4 boards into 6, and the 2 halves had 6 boards each. So once I got the 2 halves, then I could bring those 2 halves together. And it was kind of tricky to figure out how to get clamps on here because of the angles and get good clamping pressure across the joint. So the only way, or the best way that I can come up with to do it, is to sort of use these cleats that I put on each end of the board, and use that as a way to try to get some kind of clamping pressure and get the seams to come together. And I had to be careful here as I was putting these together, hitting it with the mallet. Even, I didn't want to damage that edge that I had tried so hard to get perfect on each of these boards. So used the mallet a little bit, but I was definitely cognizant of that. I didn't want to mess that up and put a big dent in it or something. So here's those cleats that I was talking about. I just took squares of plywood, and I would screw it to each side of the joint here. Screw it to each end to the board, and I wasn't too worried about screw holes here because the tops of these boards, you're going to have the tabletop sitting on top of it, so you'll never see it, and the bottom obviously is on the floor, so never going to see that either. So wasn't too worried about screw holes. And then I could just put the clamps on these blocks and bring the joint together that way. So speaking of the power carving, I was inspired several years ago by a video I watched of Jory Brigham, great furniture maker out of California. This is that piece that I saw him making, and carving the door of this blew my mind. It was the first time I'd ever seen anyone power carve, and I really wanted to try it. I've done a few things since then, but I always thought that design, that way of carving, was really cool looking, and wanted to try it for myself. And I thought, when I was designing this piece, it could look really cool if I did the entire table base that way, instead of just, one door or a panel or something in a cabinet, to have the whole table base carved in that way. So this is what I was doing. Now, this is in the middle of July in my driveway in Texas, so it was very hot. I could only stand it for a few hours each morning. I think it took me about 4 days worth of carving, and I've condensed that down to a few minutes here, but between all of the carving, hours worth of that between the various tools, and then there was a ton of time spent with cleaning everything up, because you've got all the tool marks left behind from these carving wheels. Tons of hours also with sandpaper, with card scrapers, everything else, just sort of refining it. But this is sort of the roughing in of all of the grooves, and then it's a matter of going back and making each one deeper and shaping each one with the angle grinder, and also I had a rotary tool as well that I used. So now that the dirtiest part of it is over with, I was able to bring it back inside, and like I said, using a series of the Rotex sander here with really rough grit. I think I was using 60 grit sandpaper here, and also lots and lots of sanding by hand, lots and lots of work and time spent with card scrapers to just try to get all this refined a little bit more, because it's pretty rough after you get done with the angle grinder and the rotary tool. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I would have tracked how many hours I spent carving this thing. I really should have done that. I, at this point, don't even remember, but it was many days spent just doing this. As you see me dragging the gooseneck card scraper through each one of these troughs, trying to get rid of all the little tool marks and make them nice and uniform. It was pretty tedious. My hands were pretty beat up, I must say, after days and days spent doing this. So everything that I was doing before was really more about shaping, sort of, still part of the shaping process, cleaning it up, I guess, if you will. That was all very rough grit sandpaper. Now I've finally moved to graduating up through the grits. But even as I'm going through and starting the more final sanding, finishing process on this, still find little areas where I have to hit it with a card scraper and smooth it out a little bit more. So you can see me switching back and forth between the sanding block and a card scraper here. Just final refinement. Now jumping ahead to gluing up the top. So these are just more 8/4 walnut boards that I had glued up. And from here, I'm going to cut them into the right shape. So kind of skipped ahead the whole gluing up process. You've seen that 100 times. You don't need to see a guy glue up another panel. So in order to cut that shape out, I made this template using a CNC machine. It's just easier to do it that way. I've got little marks on each side so that I can line it up with the midway, what will be the midway point of the tabletop, and just kind of roughing it out here. Once I was happy with where I had this all positioned, I used that same template, clamped it down, and using a pattern routing bit, I just went around and cut a channel about, I don't know, maybe 1/4 inch deep, just to get the cut started using the router this way. So once I had that channel, if you will, established, then I just went around and cut the rest of it off with a jigsaw, as you see me doing here. And once that's done, then I can basically just go back to the router, use a flush trim bit, and flush up the rest of the sides, make this thing nice before putting the final edge profile in. Here is that flush trim bit, just going around making it all nice and straight, nice and smooth on the sides. So, how to attach the top to the base was another consideration, and the idea that I had basically was to make these metal plates. These are made out of stainless steel, and drill them into the top using some threaded inserts. Drill them into the top of the table base, and then I've got slots in the metal plates themselves that I can affix to the bottom of the table. and they're elongated to allow for expansion and contraction of the wood. It's the best idea I could come up with. So these are with the plates attached to the table base, I could set that up. Make sure it's all centered in the table, and then I'm kind of marking out where I need to cut. So I want to have these plates recessed into the underside of the table so that they're not sticking out proud of the bottom of the table. So that's what I'm doing here, just marking out where I need to route out the recesses. So with the pattern routing bit that you just saw me attach to the router, I just put some pieces of plywood down to serve as a template, if you will, with double-sided tape. Real easy, quick and dirty. This doesn't have to be that pretty. And the same thing here, just putting in the threaded inserts into the underside of the table here. And now it's time for the first test fit. And it fits, thank God. So you can see here those elongated holes I was talking about, so that will allow for plenty of expansion, contraction of the tabletop. So as far as an edge profile, I wanted a pretty big round over. This is a pretty thick tabletop. The final thickness is close to 1.5 inches. I think 1.25 inches at least, somewhere in between 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. So I wanted a pretty big round over. So just starting out shallower, and I think I did this in 3 total passes to get the final round over profile that I wanted. So I didn't go full depth with that router bit on the top. I kind of wanted a crisp line, sort of a thumbnail profile, if you will, for the top. I went a little deeper with it on the underside of the table, though. I did want that a little bit more rounded over. And now back to sanding, more and more sanding. We're in the home stretch now. It's pretty much just doing all of the final sanding and finally get ready to put some finish on this thing and see how it looks. So confession time here. If you haven't noticed, there's quite a disparity between the color on the boards that I used for the top of this. And that's why I'm adding some tint here to the finish, and I'll explain a little bit. So I screwed up, basically. I originally went to my wood supplier, hardwood dealer, and got the 8/4 walnut boards. I did my best, as I always do, to pick out the boards that seemed like a good match with one another. And then I came home, and when I first cut those boards for the tabletop, I screwed up my measurements, and I cut a couple of the boards too short, and they weren't going to work. So I had to go back and buy 2 more 8/4 boards, and I didn't want to throw out the one good piece that I had left, but what I found was when I went back and got boards, I didn't do a good job of getting boards that matched with the ones that I'd bought previously. So I had a big disparity in the color. There was a couple of the boards that were much lighter in color than the others. So I added a little bit of that trans tint to my finish in the hopes that I could sort of even out the color on the tabletop itself. And I think it did help. It definitely did help darken up a little bit the really light boards that I had in there. So I think it was the right way to go. Now, it's not completely, it's not like adding a stain or anything like that, but it just helps a little bit. And I also think it's not a bad idea with Walnut to have a couple of drops of that trans tint, because it keeps the wood from kind of turning that more orange color over time. So, finish has all been applied. 3 coats of finish, 2 coats of the final finish with the beeswax in it, and final assembly, and time for the money shots here. And here it is in its final glory. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you liked it. If you have any questions, please comment. Let me know below. If you have any thoughts, hopefully they're good ones. If you hate it, you can also tell me that too. I like it though, and it looks cool in the house. Thanks for watching.